Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for another Thursday morning Facebook Live event. This morning we are here at the Wapello Land and Water Reserve, again just south of Hanover, Illinois. Here at Wapello we have been conducting some bumblebee surveys, specifically concerned about the rusty-patched bumblebee, which is on the endangered species list. And we have a group of volunteers that are conducting these surveys. And Pam Johnson is our lead volunteer that is kind of leading these surveys and the team involved. And she's been studying these bumblebees for a while now. And she's going to tell us a little bit about the rusty-patched bumblebee and bumblebees in general, actually. So, Pam, what can you tell us about bumblebees just in general?
Well, first of all, I think the name, where did the name Bumblebee come from? Well, it was named that because of the buzzing that it makes. When I walk through the prairie here, I first try to hear that I'm hearing a bumblebee, and then I start looking for it. The word Bumbus, which is the genus name for the species, means buzz in Latin. Another really interesting fact, I think, that's kind of fun for those of you who are Harry Potter fans, is Dumbledore is a dialectal name for bumblebee. And the author named him that because she could picture him, because he liked music, walking around humming to himself. So anyway, I think that's kind of a fun fact. Some other facts are the bumblebee versus the honeybee. Stings, the females sting, but they retract their stinger, the bumblebees do, whereas the honeybee leaves it in you and the honeybee dies after it stings you. The bumblebee, because it retracts, can sting you again, but I don't worry too much because they're going about their business out here. They're interested in the flowers, not me, unless they feel threatened. So when you're in the field and a bee starts buzzing around you, don't wave your arms and run away. Just walk away slowly and they'll leave you alone. They're just protecting their nest generally.
And their nests, where are their nests found?
Well, their nests are found in the ground. They are ground nesters. They have a smaller colony than honeybees do normally. And they're native bees, whereas the honeybee is from Europe.
Oh,
so
okay.
They have grown up around here, and hopefully they'll stay around here.
Yeah. Wow, very cool. And so where might we find these bumblebees?
Well, the bumblebees can be really found anywhere that there is pollen and nectar for them to feed on, and ground that is open enough that they can make their nest in the ground. So, tilled up land is not going to be very attracted to them, nor probably is green grass. But if you have some woodlands and the edge of the woodlands, you might find little holes there, or they'll find crevices in rocks even. If there's a little hole. I've seen them coming out of rocks around here in the spring.
Wow. Oh, very cool. So can you tell us a little bit about what they look like the honeybee versus the bumblebee?
If you can put that one up. So the one on the left is the wasp, or is it? Okay, it's the wasp. And it has a narrower waist. The one in the center is the bumblebee, and he's a nice chubby little guy. He's a lot heavier.
Has a lot of fur.
Right.
It looks kind of fluffy hair on him.
Yeah. And then the other one is the honeybee. And the honeybee is much slimmer when you see that
Yeah,
in the
see
field.
that. Yeah. And now it looks like they also have more hair on them too, but the bumblebee is significantly hairier.
So when we ID the honeybee or the bumblebee, all of them, as do all insects, have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, and wings generally. The way I first identify the bumblebee is looking at the abdomen. And the females have 6 segments, and they're either black or gold or all black. And so each species has a unique pattern to that striping, as well as looking at the thorax and that spot in between, and the head. Then I start looking to see if it's male or female, and as I said, the abdomen has an extra 7 segments for male, and then the females have a little stinger on the end there. The males don't. It's a little flatter. So, and that's really what I start looking at.
So when you're out there in the field and you are trying to ID these bumblebees and you've got your camera and everything, how is it that you determine a rusty patch bumblebee from the rest of the bumblebees?
Okay, the rusty patch on that second segment has a rusty patch right in the center of the yellow, and so that makes it different. And actually, it's not the queen that has this. She has 2 yellows. So I have not seen a queen. This one, the males and the workers have that patch, and so that's what I look for in that. And yeah, this chart is a nice chart because it shows all of the eastern United States bumblebees relative to size. So, for example, I caught one this morning, and he's one of our bigger ones. I'm not sure you can see that. Is that okay? And he's got, on the thorax, he's got that half of it is yellow and half of it is black. So that's very unique from all the others. And he's got the first segment of his abdomen is black, and then the next 2 segments are yellow. And he is on bee balm, which right now they are loving the bee balm. So I'm going to let him go. We don't kill them, we just try to ID him and then let him go. Take a picture.
There he goes.
That's the next thing we do to ID him. And with our any kind of camera, then you would take that picture, and if you need help IDing them, which I do and most people do, I submit it to either Bee Spotter or iNaturalist. And then they help with the identification. They'll get back to you and tell you what kind it is. Not immediately always, but...
So if you guys were watching last week, you might remember at Casper, we found a rusty patch bumblebee. And so right after our last week's Facebook Live event, I immediately put that picture on iNaturalist, and Dawn Marsh from the Fish and Wildlife Service responded almost immediately. So there are people out there that are watching for these observations to be
especially
logged.
the rusty patch.
Yes, yes. So, yes, that's a great thing to do. Okay, so now, what time of year, when might you see any of these bumblebees, really?
Well, I start seeing them as soon as the flowers come up in the spring, and particularly the spring ephemerals. So I started looking this year, actually the end of March, the very last week of March, and what was blooming over in the prairie, well, not in the prairie, in the woodlands, were the blackberries and black raspberries, and the flowers were blooming. So when the flowers come out, then the bumblebees come out, and at that time probably the queens. So I was seeing bigger. The queens are bigger. Then so they will go through their cycle, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it will go into October.
October.
And
Okay.
then as it, the plants are gone because they need those plants.
So
then
does the
they'll-
rusty patch bumblebee relative to the other species, do they kind of have the same time frame for their activity, or
Actually, the rusty patch has the longest.
the longest
Of being
okay.
out of all the species. So,
Okay.
and if you start looking at the charts, different species, the queens all come out first, but then the workers and the males come out at different times,
Okay, yeah.
based on the species. So that's kind of fun to follow too.
Yeah. Huh.
And I've found 3 different species here this year, but not the rusty patch, because now is the time that those workers are coming out.
Okay.
I don't think I'd know a queen if I saw it,
Sure.
But-
Yeah.
But
if we were to find a rusty patch with the rusty
Yes,
patch,
right.
about now is the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's see. So the rusty patch bumblebee was put on the endangered species list in 2017. And I've read a little bit about this, and what I've read is that the historic range of the rusty patch bumblebee has decreased about 87% since, I think
Over time.
in the
Yeah.
last 10 or 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So 87% is a pretty big change in their original range. And so that's why the rusty patch bumblebee has been put on the endangered species list. So one thing that we didn't talk about was their reproduction. Can you tell us
Right.
a little bit about that?
Well, that's kind of fun too. As I mentioned, the queen comes out first, and the queen has hibernated, one queen from the prior year, and she's one of the hatched queens. And so she'll come out and she'll forage around and get her nectar and pollen to build her nest. And then in the late spring, the workers will come out and they'll hatch and they'll start going out foraging and helping her bring food to the nest and keep things clean, all that good stuff that a queen wants. And then she'll stay in the nest at that point and just keep laying eggs. So there's sort of a progression of things being hatching over the summer. So then the males hatch, and what's their job, they'll leave the nest and they won't go back. Their job is to wait for the new queens and to fertilize them. And the new queens don't lay their eggs until the following year. So they store that fertilization until the next year. So then in the fall, the new queens have gone out and found a new nest, and they will hibernate. They won't lay eggs at that point until the following
Okay.
year.
So they hibernate.
They hibernate.
And then in the spring, they come out.
They come out.
And then that's when they start to establish their colony and
Right.
nest.
Yeah. So they're
Stored.
looking just for a place to hibernate in the winter. And what's interesting is how is a male created? Well, when she starts fertilizing the eggs, if she doesn't fertilize an egg, that becomes a male. And
Oh, wow.
so she's got control of these, how many males she has.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So that's kind of interesting.
Wow.
And yeah, then once the new queen is left, or the new queens, there can be more than one, then that winter, the old queen, the males, and the workers all die for that
Oh, they all
season.
die. Okay.
So it's just the new queen that survives over the winter.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So, the rusty patch bumblebee, in this reproduction process, throughout the year, it is collecting pollen from all of the native plants in the prairies, or if you have them planted in your own backyard, and in the spring it's in the woodland areas. What we have learned is that the the species is, they speculate the decline is due to just the loss of this habitat. So there are some plants that don't require bumblebees for pollination, like corn, and much of our our land here in Illinois is a lot of it is corn. And when you think about what that used to be, that might provide a good reason why the range of the bumblebees has decreased so much. So just loss of habitat, loss of prairies, and loss of these native plant species, loss of food source, provide a good reason for why these bumblebees are on the endangered species list.
And also, with the changing weather patterns and some of the extremes, if you think about it, our bumblebees have grown up with our native plants, and if the plants start coming out later and the queen is out there looking for nectar, she comes out, I don't know based on what, but early in her cycle, and she expects to find plants and there aren't any, so that in the future can be an issue. And further studies need to be done on that issue. Also with the pesticides, they need diversity of plants, not just because our perennials are just there for at most a month of one species. So if you just have bee balm, it's going to be gone in a couple of weeks, and you need a second flush of something. So pretty soon the goldenrod will be out here. This is why this is such a wonderful habitat, because there's been a mass of something
There's
for them.
There's always something in bloom.
The penstemon they were on originally, and we found them over in the wetlands there. Now we're not finding them there. We're finding them on the bee balm, which is scattered throughout and on the wood edges. Baptisia is another one that we're finding them on and liking. So you need that sequence, and if you don't have it, which because of monocropping, you're not going to have that sequence of things. Now, there have been studies in France that my son-in-law has been doing on the hedgerows between the farmer's field for the honeybees anyway, and that they're recommending that they put a diverse
hedgerow
things in the hedgerow for the bees, because the bees don't need a lot, and they just need difference throughout the season, so they don't have to move too far.
I see. Wow. So, can we talk a little bit about why this is so important in the first place? Why do we care?
Well, I think we care because they are native and they are necessary for our ecosystems to survive, our native wildflowers. They also are unique pollinators to certain of our vegetable crops, tomatoes in particular. They buzz pollinate tomatoes, which just means they get in there and they flap their wings so fast that it releases the pollen. So that's an interesting thing that they can do that honeybees don't do. And and it's so the workers and the queens are the ones that carry the pollen back to the nest on their legs. The males, again, are out there feeding, but not necessarily carrying the pollen around.
Wow.
And it is interesting because you'll see the bumblebees, or most bees, I think, will go to one flower. And there might be another flower right here that's a different species, but they just concentrate on one species.
Oh, wow.
And what I did read is that they scent mark the flower also, so they know not to go back to it because they've already been there. Not to waste the energy.
They checked it off their list already.
We have a question
Okay.
from Maureen. What can we do in our home gardens to help?
Okay.
That's a good question. So the question was, what can we do in our home gardens to help the bumblebees?
Well, mainly to give them the food that they need throughout the season. So you want to plant as many different species, and frankly, they don't all have to be native. I've got some Seven Suns flower, for example, tree, and they can be shrubs and trees too that are flowering. They're very happy with those. And that flowers in October, and it is covered with bees and bumblebees and butterflies and every kind of little fly, because it's the only source of anything then. So that's one. The other thing is that you do provide some nesting area. Now, you don't have to build a nest because they're going to find it in the ground, but not, they like rodent holes. Again, they're ground nesters, so you don't want to necessarily clean off everything.
Super manicured lawns
super
might
managed.
not
Just
be.
give them, and they can be even under leaves in the woods.
Sure. Okay.
And the citizen science part of it. In other words, if we can, anything we can do to help the scientists learn more about bumblebees, the better. And I think what JDCF is doing with this project is helpful, but the more people out there taking pictures of the bumblebees in their yard and posting them, this really helps scientists, because then they've got a large, more things to collect from.
And could you tell people again where they could post these photos at?
Yes, they can post them on beespotter.com.
Or maybe it's a .org.
Yeah,
I
.org.
think it's a .org.
I always forget, right. And INAT.org.
And iNaturalist.org. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has put together an iNaturalist project that anybody can participate in, where they're tracking bumblebees. And so anybody can do this. They're calling it the Backyard Bumblebee Count, and it starts tomorrow. So I believe it goes until I think it's a 12-day survey study. So just the duration of that backyard bumblebee count is the time where you can get outside, take a picture of a bumblebee, and put it on the iNaturalist Backyard Bumblebee Project. So, and if anybody is interested and needs help establishing, getting used to iNaturalist, you can always give us a call here at JDCF at info@jdcf.org. We can help you get started on that. It's a really easy way, especially if you have kids, it's an easy way to get them involved with the Citizen Science Project. Something to do during COVID era. It's a great education tool, and it's helping out scientists figure out more about these species too.
Hey, Barbara Bernard is asking, what about using insecticides in your garden?
It's not recommended, obviously, and it's difficult to tell people not to do that. So the key thing is you not do it while the bumblebees are active. And so doing it after, dusk, when they've gone back to the hive, probably, some of them. Now, there's still issues because they're nectaring on these plants, and if you've got a systemic in the plant, it is going to affect them. And again, in Europe and some of the studies that I've seen, it doesn't necessarily, in the honeybees, kill them, for example, because I don't know that they've done a lot of studies with bumblebees yet. But on the honeybees, it doesn't necessarily kill them, but it reduces their immune system. And then they're more susceptible to the mites, the pests that invade their system, or disease. So it's not good for us or them, I'd say.
Yeah,
But
that's a good question.
Yeah.
And I would say planting some native species in your garden rather than
ones that need
nursery
spraying.
cultivar. Yeah, just don't plant something that needs to be sprayed.
But it's not, to me, it's not that these plants get eaten too. If you look out here, you got Japanese beetles devouring them. I think we have to change our attitude about how we view beauty. You know, if a leaf has a hole in it, get over it.
Mm-hmm.
That's my feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But just me.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you so much for all this good information. If anybody else has any more questions, you can feel free to type them in, and we can get around to answering them even after this session is over. So thanks again to our sponsor, the First Community Bank of Galena Apple River State Bank. They've been great partners in sponsoring our educational programs. So thanks guys for joining us, and we will see you again next week.
And where will we be next week?
Oh, next week we will be at the Gramercy Park in East Dubuque to learn about the Native American burial mounds there. Very cool. All right, see you guys.
Bye.